40 hours a week makes me $2,000 a month, and my rent is $1,660.
Have landlords lost their minds?
The landlord raised the rent again to $9,500 per month.
So today we're going to be checking out rent prices in 2024 because it's become pretty apparent that it's going to become very difficult, if not impossible, for a lot of people to own houses, especially if we keep seeing just nonstop price increases on houses today. Even though the sales volume is dwindling, I guess people are fine just having their houses listed up on Realtor or Zillow forever until they finally find somebody to overpay for their house. But then because of that, one of the only other options is renting. And depending on where you live, it's either a good deal or a bad deal. And we're going to get into it in this video, along with some of your experiences from comments in previous videos. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, but we'll start off with the first video.
Why is it that I have to work 40 hours a week just so I can have a place to live? 40 hours a week makes me $2,000 a month, and my rent is $1,660. So I work 40 hours a week so I can have a 2-bedroom apartment and an extra $300 a month. Like, it doesn't cover my phone, internet, food, you know?
And when I see videos like this and all of the comments replying to it, I always remember that apparently that your rent or mortgage is only supposed to be 30%, I think maybe even a third, so 33% of your monthly income. Unfortunately, that means you have to make a ridiculous amount of money, or you have to live in pretty bad conditions, which even that's not 100% true. We'll get a little bit later in the video talking about city living in the apartments and how off the walls that is. But that's why so many people right now are either choosing to stay and live with their parents way past the age that you're supposed to move out, you know, after college, or having a almost family level amount of roommates in an apartment, splitting all the rent and utilities, all the bills, just to lower the cost of living enough to survive. And especially in the past couple years, if you were renting in an area that has become increasingly desirable, especially to people who are used to unbelievably high rent, of course, like the New York City, Miami, LA area, and they're moving out. If you're not in a rent controlled area, you could have some insane rent increases just to kind of kick you out.
My rent just went from $1,360 to $3,900 a month.
Now, I bet a lot of people would think that this is probably illegal. It's not like you go from $1,000 a month to $10,000 a month. Some sort of rule has to go against that. But unfortunately, with what we'll see in this next clip, if you're not in a rent-controlled area, this could still happen to you.
Our landlord increased our rent by $7,000 per month.
Sisters Yumna and Khadija Farouk have lived in a Midtown Toronto building for the past 3 years. Their rent was $2,500 per month. The landlord raised the rent to $3,500 a month, and when they had concerns and wanted to change their lease, the landlord raised the rent again to $9,500 per month.
We know like our building is not rent controlled, so this was always something we were worried about, that if something were to happen, that this could be like an issue. And of course, we can't pay $9,500 per month.
There's no way he can really be serious about giving us this notice. Like, we were just very shocked.
The rent increase guideline for this year and next year is 2.5%, but the guideline does not apply to buildings built after November 15th, 2018. Landlords with newer buildings can raise the rent by as much as they want.
This is egregious, horrible, and unfortunately, thanks to the current government, legal.
Tenant advocate Jordy Dent says without rent controls, rents in some buildings are being hiked to astronomical levels.
The simplest solution is to bring back rent control on all units.
At Queen's Park, both the NDP and Liberal parties are calling on the Ontario government to bring back rent controls.
To make rent more affordable and really help renters get by, Ontario needs to bring in strong rent control again. We had strong rent control in the 90s, and it is time to return it.
We do have to have some form of rent control on all rental properties.
The Farouk sisters now have to move out and find another place to stay, and they worry they'll also have to pay more for rent.
The rental market is just so crazy right now, and the prices they've gone up, right? And so everything's just a big question mark.
Okay, so they're probably in one of the most expensive places. We've shown that Toronto time and time again with people getting into debt, trying to live there, trying to rent an apartment and realizing how expensive it actually is. Just having to buy parking spots for your car in an apartment building for like $50,000. It's unbelievable. But it's no surprise that they were raising the rent from $2,500 to $3,500. Now, I don't know how big their apartment was, but $2,500 does not seem like a lot right now in Toronto, especially if it is in a newer building. But like you saw in the video, there are loopholes. Just because it is a brand new building, they don't have rent control. So the landlord wasn't seriously trying to charge them $10,000 a month. They just wanted the tenants out of the building because they know that they could probably get somebody else to pay $3,500 a month. So that clip was from Canada, so I did look some stuff up. Now there will be different rules in different cities, but right here we have how much can a landlord raise rent in New York, because I would say New York and LA are probably the craziest, so this will be the most extreme. And for the rent stabilized apartments, like we saw even in Canada, there's only a certain amount that you could increase it. In the first year, only 1.5%, and then in the second year, 2.5% up to. However, when you start getting into the non-regulated apartments, it kind of just sounds like they could do whatever they want. They just need to give you an advanced notice. So 30 days advance notice, under 5% increase, 60 days between 5 and 10% increase, and then 90 days for increases over 10%. So it just sounds like anything after the 10%, they just need to give you 3 months in advance that your rent is going to skyrocket, and there's kind of nothing you could do. But this is all too common in very expensive areas. We just have a screenshot really quickly of somebody talking about rent being out of control where she lives, and apparently she was only paying $2,100 a month. So somebody replied saying that it's actually pretty cheap, and then when you go into the hashtags, you realize that she lives in California and LA. But as you could see with her name being It's Nurse Laura, I would say nurses get paid pretty well. I'm not saying that they're super rich, but they are in a pretty in-demand job, so I don't think you really have to live in LA to be able to make a good amount of money. I think that's what a lot of people still believe, where you have to live in some sort of city or just outside of a city to be able to get more money. And I mean, that is definitely true because of how expensive it is. Of course, the employers are going to pay you more if you're like comparing it to living in the middle of nowhere like North Dakota. But if you are that kind of city person and you want to live in the city, I mean, that's on you. That's just not who I am. But I think a lot of people also believe that they have to live around that kind of area to be able to make a good amount of money, but then all of the expenses kind of drain that extra income. So we could just take a look at some screenshots for apartments in New York, because this stuff, I mean, again, you just have to absolutely love being in a city, because the deals that you're going to get for the amount of money that you're paying is just not worth it. This kitchen on a almost $2,700 a month NYC apartment, it literally looks like they just took a chunk right out of the wall, and I mean, look at that stove, man. How are you going to be able to cook on that at all? I don't even know if you could turn the burners on because the fridge is completely in the way. I don't even know how that's allowed. Right here, we have a nice open window to a giant brick wall. I would assume that is just another apartment building built literally right next to it. So maybe at one point you were able to look out and see the sky, but no more. I mean, I don't really have to say much for this picture. This kind of just explains itself right there. Here are some of the unbelievably small apartments. Manhattan NYC rent is $1,400 a month, and it is just that room alone. So you have a sink, I think one of the mini refrigerators right there, and your bed. That's all you could basically put in that room. So $1,400 a month for that as well. I'm definitely not going to be taking that deal. This I've never seen before, but apparently it's more common in New York City. The shower is right next to the kitchen, which is right next to the fridge, which is across from the stove. Now, I get that these are studio apartments, so everything's going to be in one room, but it just looks awful. And I would still say, because it's not absolutely deteriorating, it's probably pretty expensive to just rent this one single room. Here's a 66 square foot apartment in NYC. This really does look like the image where you could just fit a twin mattress and you have a sink right next to you, and that's all you have. But here you go, $2,000 a month rent for a 1-bedroom apartment with the shower in the living room. I mean, it's right there. It's not even like a curtain one, so you could actually see somebody in the shower. I know it's like a little blurred out with the glass, but still, come on, man. We have a comment from one of you guys. Our rent in LA for a 2-bedroom townhome in a decent area is $34.50 a month. I'm currently renting where I am because that's kind of the ballpark around the houses around me, but because of that, you're getting 3,000, 3,500 square foot giant houses for that price, not a 2-bedroom townhome. But we have another comment from one of you guys. You don't have to be in NYC to pay that much for a small place. I'm in Florida and pay $12.45 for my rent and pet rent. You add in other costs and I'm up over $1,400 a month, and my place is 288 square feet. Honestly, that's basically just a large room. And that's the going rate around Southwest Florida. I mean, you're in the Miami area. I know it's just as expensive. People love that area. Maybe not so much right now in the end of summer is still pretty warm, but that kind of stuff to me is just too much.
Your rent has gone up, and if you looked on Zillow recently for relief, you've probably been bummed out. Got a bad case of the I can never move agains. You're not imagining it. A study finds that for the first time ever, rent is unaffordable for half of all U.S. renters. The study from Harvard finds rents went way up during COVID. Half of renters paying more than 30% of their income on rent. 25% of people pay more than 50% of their income on rent. The study author told NPR, even though rents have started to come down in some expensive areas, people most in need are not seeing a lot of relief. She says new apartments on average are more than $1,400 a month. Now remember, this is nationwide. She adds that millions of low-cost apartments have been wiped off the market. Average cost for an apartment in LA County is $2,700 a month, although that is down about $300 since last year. It is still nearly twice the national average.
What's a young college graduate to do?
Stay home.
Yeah.
Live at home.
I guess so.
Yeah.
So with that, like I said earlier, people got all bent out of shape when I made a video talking about people still living in their parents' house, 20s and 30s, having full-time jobs. It's not like they were just mooching and sitting and playing COD all day. But unless you have a very solid paying job, which what we've seen in my other videos talking about the job market, people are walking around with bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, making like $14 an hour. The amount of competition to be able to get a solid job where you're going to get close to that six-figure salary is just very honestly unlikely for a lot of people right now. And because of that, you have no choice. And I can only really see that being more and more common over the next few years because I've seen more of these videos popping up.
There's a moving truck. There's a moving pod. There's a moving truck.
So, I mean, people can't handle it anymore and they have to move and either move to an area that's cheaper or pretty far away from where they live or move back to their parents. And I'm basically in that same boat. I used to live in New Jersey about a year ago, and when I decided to move out, I moved about 8 hours away from the rest of my family because of how expensive it was where I used to live. Now, luckily for me, where I live in this area right now, the rent hasn't really caught up to the prices of the actual full-size houses here. So I could live in a pretty nice area and not have a ridiculously high rent, but especially in comparison to where I used to live, I remember just before I ended up moving out here, I found a place for rent that was extremely similar, almost identical to where I am right now. However, the rent price was more than double. It was $4,400 to $4,900 a month for rent. This was in Raritan, New Jersey, by the way. It's not like I was living in New York City or Hoboken, one of the areas where it's like a very city-centric area. So everything's just more expensive. People are going out to eat, you know, like the whole city life kind of thing. It wasn't like that. So I was not going to be paying $5,000 a month just to stay where I used to live in New Jersey. We have some comments from you guys. My rent went from $1,400 to $2,350 in 1 year. Another one, rent went from $1,200 a month to $1,900 a month in 2 years. And I know we're specifically talking about just renting right now in this video, but you could kind of say the same thing with a lot of people and their mortgages. Of course, if you're locked in a rate, it's obviously not going to change, but if you live in certain areas, the property taxes have increased heavily. actually any of the insurance. I've seen video after video talking about Florida, how insane insurance prices have gotten just because they live in Florida. I mean, there's a lot of hurricanes that come. Sometimes it does do a lot of damage, sometimes it doesn't, and it just rains. But because of that, the insurance has gone through the roof so much that it is honestly like a mortgage increase. Because if you don't have that insurance and your house gets damaged, you are completely screwed. But then on the other side, I've also seen people that did have that insurance, and then when they make a claim, it gets denied. So it's like a lose-lose situation. So honestly, I'm not gonna lie, it doesn't really seem like there's too many good solutions out there.
Have landlords lost their minds? My roommate moved out a few months ago, so I currently live in a 2-bed, 2-bath by myself. And the price that I am paying for rent for a 2-bed, 2-bath with 2 parking spaces is the same amount of money I would be paying for a studio in Los Angeles, California. I feel like our whole perspective is warped because I hear people talking about, oh, I found a studio for $2,000, what a good deal. I just can't even process what is happening with rent costs in LA and also around the whole country. How is anybody affording rent?
I mean, we already went over this earlier, but I feel like if you are that kind of city person and you want to live in NYC or you want to live in LA, then you're going to have to deal with the consequences. But there's a lot of people that are on the fence. They just want to have a nice corporate job in New York City. Honestly, it'd be a better deal to find something farther away, maybe in the suburbs or in a less populated area. You would make less money, but your expenses would be a lot lower. So I've already said time and time again, that kind of stuff is just not for me. But I think a lot of people are getting very tired of the city life and the expenses that go along with it. We moved from SoCal to South Carolina last year. Rent went from $2,600 for a small 2-bedroom apartment to a $2,600 for a huge 4-bed house. And I mean, that's very common in both of the Carolinas. I live in North Carolina right now, and that's what I was talking about with any of the really large houses that are being built around me, any of the townhouses. Very, very large square footage. I mean, bedrooms, bathrooms, multi-car garages for prices of 2 bedrooms and even like really nice studio apartments in these cities. And I think this next comment is what a good amount of people did, but now it's starting to kind of backfire, as we've seen with some of the job market videos. It's remote work. The cost of housing was based on income of area, but since now people can get paid in California rates, they could live in Iowa for half the cost. And I think that is definitely a good idea. I mean, technically that's kind of what I do. I just don't have a normal 9 to 5. I do 1099s instead of W2, but all my stuff is online. So I could kind of do this anywhere in the country. So if I went and lived in New Jersey again, I would just be spending a lot more money just to survive and have the same amenities. But we could go back to not having a ton of solutions for people renting right now, especially when they can't afford a house either. We have started to see some people begin to live in storage units.
There's something cold inside of the unit. Sandwiches, a lot of times we make salad. If we want to get power, we use our power bank. They also have power here so we can charge our power bank. Me and my baby will live here as long as we need to until we get the shelter that we want. Because we're living here, now we can save up more money to get what we really want.
So I mean, honestly, it doesn't really sound like a bad idea until you figure out you're not actually allowed to do this with like any of these storage unit companies. So unfortunately, this guy would have probably gotten away with it for at least a significantly longer time, but he made a TikTok of this video showing his whole setup and showing his face, and then he eventually got found out by the storage unit company and kicked out. So I know it is illegal, but you got to do what you got to do. So if you do end up doing this kind of stuff, please do not put anything online incriminating yourself, because then you're going to get kicked out like this person. But he's not the only person to do it. Again, at the same time, you could see here in this video, storage unit is only $150 a month, an apartment is $2,000. Again, probably shouldn't put your face on this. It is still technically illegal. And I mean, I get it. They're just trying to survive. They don't want to pay $1,000, $2,000 for an apartment where you could kind of get at least a good amount of the amenities in a storage unit. But again, it is still not allowed. So if you're gonna do it, please don't put it online. We've seen in my past videos so many people just putting stuff online that is either not allowed or in a gray area. I mean, I still remember that guy writing off a whole bunch of stuff on his taxes and putting it online when it was kind of a fast track way to get audited. It's just the same story right here. Like, if you're gonna do it, please just don't put it online. Are you gonna get caught? I mean, the top comment on this video is the same exact thing. Didn't we learn from the last guy? Don't record yourself living in a storage unit. I hope everything works out for you with 50,000 likes. So I mean, I don't know the end of this story. Maybe he did get caught. Honestly, I wouldn't doubt if he did, because there's 10,000 comments on this video and he put his face in the video, so he's probably gonna get caught. But one of the other options that I have seen, and especially during COVID, it was a very big thing just in vacations period, because you weren't really allowed to go out, all the mask mandates, you guys know. But that is the new increased interest in van life.
Here are 3 reasons why living in a van just makes sense. For one, I get to live rent-free next to the ocean in one of the most expensive US cities. I mean, look at the prices for single bedrooms in my area. I'll pass. Reason 2 is that you can literally move wherever you want, whenever you want. Like the desert, the forest, the beach, or just your favorite local park. Which brings me to my last reason. This lifestyle opens the door to complete control over your own time. Without the financial pressure of a house, you can pretty much do whatever you want. And all of the alone time is nice too.
Okay, so there's positive and negatives to this clip. And the first thing that I want to talk about, I know that it's variable. However, she's in a pretty large Sprinter van. So if we go online right now, Sprinter vans are in very high demand. Almost every company wants them, even like construction, plumbing. Amazon wants to deliver in them. It's pretty difficult to get Sprinter vans right now. And because of that, you could see the market. And she also had a pretty long wheelbase. So I think it was like the 170 extended. You could see here used $40,000, $38,000. I mean, it's all over the place with the mileage and the year and then the type of van, but the one that she had is honestly nicer looking than any of the stuff that we're looking at right here. But I mean, 50,000 on this one just alone. So, I mean, when we're getting to that price, the van life seems like it's more of an option to just travel instead of a necessity, because if you could have spent $50,000 on a van without any of the modifications, of course, you have to put in to have a little sink and a bed and all the areas to put your personal items and all of that. So it's not just a straight $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for this van. It is going to cost a little bit more just to add everything that you actually want. But still, it's not a necessity that you have to get a Sprinter van. You could get something that's cheaper, maybe find a better deal on a different brand. But then the other issue I thought is talked about in this clip.
This is how I stealth camp in cities in my van with my cat and dog. And you should trust me, because I've been living in vans for 6 years and I've never gotten a parking ticket. Stealth camping means that when you're in cities or urban camping, that nobody's gonna look at your van and say, hey, somebody lives in there. Before going to a city, I look up their overnight parking ordinances and their RV ordinances. If there's anything against overnight parking or living in your car, I don't go to that city. We cover our windows so that nobody can see inside. I don't open my fan up all the way because it could be seen outside. And use the Bluetti to power the nighttime lights, because these regular lights can be seen from the outside. For bed, I put my van into drive mode so that I can wake up early in the morning and get out of here before anybody notices. And before hitting the road, we make sure that we plug in our Bluetti so that it's ready for the next day.
Okay, so from this video, it seems like you're not really allowed to do this, so you kind of have to skirt around the rules. I was thinking that from the first video with the woman who I think was around LA, right next to the beaches, like she said she was living like rent-free. I kind of doubt you're allowed to have this giant van just pulled up, parked right next to one of the beaches like that, and never really get in trouble. Like she said, she was doing all of these specific things just to make it look like she wasn't actually living in the van, because you're not allowed to do that, at least in certain areas. So wherever you want to go, you kind of have to look up the areas and see if you're allowed to or not. Or if you are, then you have to make it seem like you're not really sleeping there. So it's not really as easy as it sounds. So I mean, overall, I still think it is a pretty cool thing. I bet it would be pretty fun doing that for a couple weeks traveling around, but maybe it's not really for me. If it is for you, or you have some sort of good deal and you could spend significantly less on rent and bills and all of that and just be able to save money for a long period of time, I would say 100% do it. But there are some things you definitely need to know before just jumping in on the van life. So I think one of the last options you should have before finally having to move out, if your rent does increase like a crazy amount of people have in the past few years, is just to straight up ask. And I thought that this little template was probably your best bet to do that. Unfortunately, I can't move forward with this increase. It's simply not within my budget. I'd hate to have to move because I love living here and I know that relisting this unit for you could be a hassle. So I've been a good tenant, no complaints, all of that, paying the rent on time. So it's basically in a nice way trying to persuade your landlord to not increase rent. Now, I'm not saying that this is most likely going to help you, especially if you have a good deal right now in an area that is exploding in popularity. They're just probably wanting to get you out because they know somebody else is going to pay more money, like we saw in that earlier clip with them paying almost $10,000 a month in Toronto, which was just nuts. But I mean, it doesn't hurt to try, especially if you have to move out all of your crap to some other apartment. That'll cost money or at least a lot of time. So I think using this as a last resort is probably a good deal, but let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, along with any of your experiences. But YouTube thinks you'll like this video popping up on screen right now. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, and I'll talk to you guys later.